Well, welcome all to the European MedDRA User Group webinar. We're living through some strange times, so this webinar is a part of that. Normally, we would be face-to-face in Amsterdam today, but obviously due to the pandemic, we've chosen a different route. So thank you for your participation. My name is Patrick Ravel. I'm the director of the MedDRA MSSO. My colleague Liz Thomas will be helping us with technical support through the webinar. I'll introduce my fellow speakers in just a moment. But just a few mechanical questions I want to talk through. You will be able to ask questions during the webinar. We will answer them at the end, so don't hesitate maybe to ask your question when you have it. You can see the instructions there. There's a pop-out. You need to pop out the control panel located in the upper right of your screen. You can then type in your question and then click the send button. Again, we'll deal with the questions at the end of all of the presentations. Due to the time constraints, which is roughly 90 minutes, we may not be able to get to all of the questions that you have submitted, but I strongly encourage you to do so and kind of make it a useful and helpful meeting for all. So a couple of questions that we normally get asked. We have posted the slides on the MedDRA.org website, so all of the presentations are available for you right now. As you heard earlier, Liz will be recording this and will also post the recorded version of this webinar on the MedDRA.org website. We can't do these sort of meetings without help from our users, and specifically the MedDRA User Group Steering Committee, and you can see the happy smiling faces there. So very much appreciate their efforts to help us to develop the content and identify speakers and kind of making sure what we're providing is of interest to the community. So thank you very much to the steering committee. So here's the agenda. I'll go through a little bit, maybe a shorter presentation than I normally do on a face-to-face meeting, but a few updates from the MSSO, not the least of which will have to do with the COVID-19. So we'll talk a bit about that. Then Martin Menke from CSL Behring will talk about the use of MSSO tools during MedDRA reversioning. And Sheila Else from Bayer we'll talk about the Sno-Med CT MedDRA mapping use. So I think you'll find these presentations to be very useful and interesting to you. As I mentioned, at the end of these sessions, we'll address any questions that you might have. So with that, let me start my presentation. So as I mentioned, I'll go through a few topics. The COVID-19 obviously has impacts to the content of MedDRA, but also to the services that we provide with the MSSO. So I'll talk through a bit about what's involved there. We do have an update relative to MedDRA translations, which I want to talk about. Today we are actually posting the beginning of a alpha testing of the Sno-Med MedDRA mapping. So a number of people have come forward to volunteer to test both the content and the format. So I'll talk a bit about that. And finally, I'll talk about a new function that we've added to the MedDRA website to support an online chat directly to our help desk. So first about COVID-19 and MedDRA. So certainly everyone's being affected in a variety of different forms. MedDRA is an obvious place that would need to change and support the need. So the pandemic obviously has prompted this need to both code and report the infection. So early on, we worked with the Points Consider Working Group to collaborate to produce a communication, which you will see today. In fact, I think we'll be sending a broadcast email out shortly after this webinar. It's intended to inform users of existing terms that can be used today and the new terms that are being added to MedDRA. There is a recommendation included within the presentation or within the notification that says until September 2020, when we release version 23.1, for verbatim reports of COVID-19, you should use the existing terms available in MedDRA 23.0. We have added new terms to MedDRA already, and we're continuing to add more. These supplemental terms are viewable within the MedDRA web-based browser in the supplemental view. In fact, we strongly encourage you, if you would like to submit other terms, to look within the MedDRA browser in the supplemental view so you know what has already been submitted and will be coming to you, because we are getting some duplicate requests. So if you could do that, that would be helpful to us. We're suggesting in the notification, should these supplemental terms should not be used for coding or communication to other organizations, since supplemental terms are not official MedDRA terms as yet. If you think about it, there is a large kind of ecosystem that is the MedDRA community. So maybe a single organization could, potentially load these supplemental terms, but that would mean regulatory authorities would also need to update to these terms. So we are starting some discussions within ICH to see what, if anything, can be done before the 23.1 release in September. No guarantees here yet, but we understand the need from the user community, and we're seeing if it is feasible to do something between now and the 23.1 release, which is currently scheduled for September. So certainly if something changes relative to that schedule, we'll let you know. But for right now, this is the guidance that we can provide, is to use the existing terms and at least be aware of the new terms that are coming your way. So just give you a little bit of a flavor on in this table on the left-hand side, you can see the existing terms that we have in 23.0. This is just a sample. It's not all terms. And then on the right-hand side, you see more detailed terms related directly to COVID-19. So I would expect a fair number of new terms to be added specifically for the pandemic terms, but we're also looking at other types of terms related to quarantine and supply chain interruptions. So again, we strongly encourage you to submit other terms to support these. And again, look at the web-based browser and the supplemental view if you can before you submit those terms. So there's also obviously impacts to the MSSL as well. So I want to talk a little bit about that. Certainly on the training front, you probably have seen that, like many other organizations, we've had to cancel face-to-face training classes, and we've done that through June of 2020. Based on the course of the pandemic, there are other additional translations that are possible. So stay tuned if you're looking to attend training classes in after the June timeframe. We do understand that this creates a bit of a training void, so we are looking to provide additional webinars and also to enhance the webinars to provide more interactive components to these webinars, such that they may last a little bit longer, maybe 90 minutes instead of an hour. But since there's no other training being offered, we think we could potentially add a bit more interactivity with users for those webinars. So stay tuned for changes relative to the webinars that we have. This user group meetings obviously have been affected. Certainly this meeting, that we've transitioned into a webinar, but we've canceled the China user group meeting, which was I think it was going to be in the May timeframe, and looking to replace these with webinar format. The USDIA is still on schedule for June. I have a sense that probably won't happen, but you can likely see that we'll be canceling our face-to-face meeting that we had, a user group meeting in Washington, and we may look to replace that with a webinar as well, so stay tuned. Relative to the other functions or services the Dm Ssl provides, we are continuing to provide the scheduled releases. If you think about actually the impact of the COVID-19 virus, it came at probably the worst time for our release schedule because it became much more of an issue, say in late February, early March, which was just as we released MedDRA 23.0, and it creates the longest period of time before the next version is available. But we are certainly processing now change requests. There's no impact or delay to that at all. The help desk is certainly up and running, so if you have any questions or concerns about how things, normal questions that you have or COVID-related terms, please don't hesitate to contact the help desk. That's continuing to run. Subscription processing equally up and running. Whether you're submitting a new subscription request or renewing one, there's no interruption to the processing of subscriptions. This is really kind of due to the ability of the MSSO staff to work remotely. We're very familiar with it. We do it a great deal. So it's not a significant change for us other than maybe the daily nature for some of the staff. But it's a very familiar sort of a format for us. So let me shift gears now to MedDRA translations. On the left-hand side, you can see the existing translations that we have, of which there are 14, if you count the new one, which is Brazilian Portuguese, which was added in March of this year. All of the MSSO tools that provide translation options or user interface views in all of the languages include the Brazilian Portuguese as well. So I think that really enhances the utility of not just MedDRA, but also the tools themselves, and that all of the MedDRA languages are supported. These translations are significant efforts, so they are full translations. So every MedDRA term has been translated, and all of the user documentation has been translated in each of these languages and is updated with each MedDRA release. Switching now to the Sno-Med CT and MedDRA mapping. This is an ongoing effort that we've been doing, I think, for roughly a year and a half now. We're kind of reaching a significant milestone. This has been a part of the Innovative Medicines Initiative Web Radar 2 project, so which is just about completed at this point. What we did as a part of that, a specific work package focused on creating these mappings between Sno-Med and MedDRA to Sno-Med. We initially started with frequently used MedDRA terms that were derived from European Medicines Agency and MHRA, the UK regulatory authorities database, to identify frequently used terms, so essentially get the biggest value for mapping. So we're not going to map every term, so we're focusing on the ones that we see that are most frequently used and would be of the greatest pharmacovigilance value to our users. So there are really two maps. When I talk about the mapping, there is obviously a map from MedDRA to Sno-Med and from Sno-Med to MedDRA. So when you take a look at these maps, and we encourage you to do that, you'll see they're actually two separate ones. So today is the milestone that I was mentioning. We are just starting an alpha test, which is what we're looking for is both feedback on the content and structure of the mapping. So do you agree with how the terms were mapped? Are there other terms that you see that need to be mapped? I have to say that the bar to mapping is a fairly high one. So it's not just, hey, I might use this in the future. You really need to demonstrate a strong pharmacovigilance need or regulatory need for a particular mapping, because there's a fair amount of effort that goes into mapping and maintaining these. We're also looking for feedback on the structure. So if the format, which is right now a very simple one that we're distributing, in a spreadsheet. There's also the RF2 format that's provided by our Sno-Med colleagues, which I think Sno-Med users are very much used to receiving Sno-Med distributions in RF2 format, so it's in that format as well. So look forward to that process going forward. This gives you a little bit of a snapshot of what's involved, and fairly simple. On the upper box from MedDRA to Sno-Med, you'll see the LLT code, the LLT name, the Sno-Med CT ID number, and the fully specified name. That's the term on the Sno-Med side that the MedDRA term maps to. Similarly, on the Sno-Med to MedDRA map, starts with the Sno-Med CT ID, the fully specified name again, going to a MedDRA code and MedDRA LLT. Now the MedDRA terms can be LLTs or PTs, but the label just describes it as LLT names. So fairly simple. It is term by term, but a fair amount of effort went into this, and including Martin Menke, who was part of the team that helped develop this. So I very much appreciate his effort and the effort of others to support that mapping. A little bit about the schedule. So if you look maybe from the left to the right, we're kind of just now at the end of March, where we're starting the alpha test period. We have provided a test protocol and other support documents to review the mappings. We've gotten some volunteer testers, and we've notified them to be able to download and access the mappings. We do, and I think this is a key part of this, the goal is not just to produce the mapping one time, but it is to maintain it going forward. So we'll have the alpha test period from now through September of this year. After that, we will then prepare for the first production release, which is scheduled in April of 2021. The mapping will be available to all Sno-Med or MedDRA users and be able to access very similarly to how you access MedDRA releases. Relative to maintenance, we do anticipate that there will be changes, obviously, in MedDRA and Sno-Med, which may impact the mappings. So that would be part of our maintenance effort. We will put in place a change request process that will be similar to the current MedDRA change request process, where there's a tool that you enter in the requested term and your justification. And if you remember, I was just talking about the need for a strong justification for any terms that you look to be mapped or changes to existing mapped terms. So we look forward to this process, and we look to have that in place by April of 2021 when we come out with the first production release. Switching again to the last topic, which will be the MedDRA website chat function. This is a new function that we added in the last few months. It's available through the MedDRA website, which I'll give you a screenshot in a moment so you understand where it can be found. I think the strength of it is that users can ask questions and interact with MSS's help desk staff directly and immediately. So right now, or prior to the chat function, you had to send a message to our help desk, and while we were prompt and usually responding within 24 to 48 hours, sometimes it's much nicer, obviously, to get an immediate response. So we don't man the chat function 24/7, but when the help desk staff are working, whether that's in Europe or in Asia or in the US, because we have staff in all of those regions, if they are available and online, they will support and respond to your questions. You will still be able to submit a question through the chat function if a help desk staff is not available, and essentially that ends up being treated as if it were an email help desk ticket, and then will be followed up as in the same way that existing email help desk tickets are addressed. So I think that's a nice upgrade, and you can see right now, if you may have noticed when you go to the MedDRA website, this blue box in the bottom right-hand corner appears, and you can see the, you have the opportunity then to enter your own live chat. So I encourage you to do that. And if you have an immediate question that could be responded to, the help desk people will treat it just as if it were an email question. In other words, if it's a very complicated or difficult question, they may need to go to others within the MSSO to complete your question. So they will respond to what they can, and if need be, we'll come back with a more complete answer via email shortly thereafter, if necessary. With that, thank you for your attention. And as I mentioned, we'll do the questions during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Okay. So now I'd like to introduce Martin Menke from CSL Behring, who will talk about the use of MSSO tools during the MedDRA reversioning process. So Martin, the floor is yours.
Hi everyone. I just need to share my screen. Welcome to you all. And let's start with the presentation. So I will be talking about how actually CSL is using the tools that the MSSO is providing in scope of the licensing agreements you're having. So if you have a license, these are free to use for you, no additional costs on those. I'll start with just a little presentation of CSL, so what the setting is, and I'm working within pharmacovigilance, so what pharmacovigilance is in that context. The main thing we're reversioning and where these tools come in very handy are the MedDRA groupings, so collections of MedDRA terms for a certain purpose. I will have a short introduction on that, and then I will show you examples of how to use the various tools, which are the data impact report in the MVET, the MedDRA version analysis tool, the supplemental terms, how you can use them in the web-based browser, and last but not least, the version report, and again, questions we will address at the end. So what's CSL? CSL is a biotech company. Actually, we are not the 5th largest, but start of the year, we recognized we are the 3rd largest. Our portfolio is on immunoglobulins, coagulations, some specialties, but rare diseases, all in all, genetic issues. We have a lot of albumin sales, and actually we're a group who's also into vaccines, especially influenza. We use 3 basic platforms, and that's plasma fractionation, recombinant technology, and cell and gene therapy. This is our list of most important innovations we're working on. But that's kind of the background where we're coming from. So concerning MedDRA, we request quite a number of new terms because in rare diseases you recognize that here and there's a MedDRA term missing and all these things. So this is happening every day. Where are we using MedDRA, and where's my position actually? Where are we using the MedDRA groupings I will be talking about? So it's pharmacovigilance. Most of you will know similar depictions of a pharmacovigilance house of quality, so to say. And the reddish bits are where kind of the MedDRA comes in mostly. So it's the case processing, the signal detection, and naturally it's a tool, and there is some IT around it. The MedDRA groupings, as said, this is a collection of MedDRA terms for a certain purpose. And these need to be MedDRA reversioned. Every half year we have a new MedDRA version, and you need to check your groupings for whatever you're using them. For example, for signal detection, when you're not only using SMQs, but have your own algorithms called CMQs. They may support your data entry, the case processing via having quality checks, or supporting data entry by having an auto-listedness tabulation behind it, or kind of make something to add on to an important medical events list, and coding quality checks. And last but not least, if you need to report on certain issues outside of the usual seriousness, labeledness criteria. But this list is not complete, but this is where your groupings may come in handy. What you need for those to create and last but not least to maintain in the end is, well, you need documentation on what your groupings are, what is their purpose. You need the medical concepts defined, and how they're built. And that's kind of the key for reversioning. You actually need to have a documentation on where have you looked in MedDRA, and what was the rationale to include or not include certain terms. Because this is what you will need for looking up the new terms in the end, and to check, is there new terms for my MedDRA groupings that I need to add. So, but how to create such things is described in the MedDRA data retrieval and presentation points to consider, and that's just and some examples how we at CSL use MedDRA groupings for signal detection. We have certain things, certain risks we are monitoring for our products which do not fit an SMQ, so we created CMQs, company MedDRA queries, and those are used to highlight certain cases to reviewers for a closer look. We use MedDRA groupings in case processing, so data entry people are supported by auto-listedness tabulations, so that they don't need to enter the listedness for each and every country manually in the database, but they just need to check and correct for special situations. And we also use a company important medicals event list. We check certain coding issues. We have some errors and warnings established in our database. So for example, unqualified lab test terms will not be used for AE coding, and we also use reporting rules where we have certain things as commitments to be reported expeditedly to agencies shortly after they're being authorized for marketing and other things. So the list is not exhaustive. It's just some ideas. And how can you use and for what part actually use certain tools in your database or in your lists? So you can check an impact on your existing terms. So that means, were there certain changes? Have terms become non-current? Have they changed allocation to primary system organ class and all these things? So if you have a list of existing terms for a certain purpose, there's the MedDRA version analysis tool where you simply upload your data and run those through. That's kind of the impact on existing terms. If you have concepts, they need to be updated, and you always need every half year check the new MedDRA terms, whether they match your grouping definitions. And for that, you can use the supplemental terms within the web-based browser or the MedDRA version report. The web-based browser actually has the advantage you can work earlier. You don't need to wait to the 1st of March or 1st of September to start your analysis, and it gives you the full secondary view. The MVAT will only provide you with a secondary SOC information. So in between levels is difficult to find, but you'll find them in the web-based browser in the supplementary terms. And changes to MedDRA inherent groupings. So the SMQs, for example, that's very well laid out in the MedDRA version report. And I'll show you what the impact will do and how to do it just now. Just mentioning the auto-listedness, that's the set of terms that supports data entry to quicken, to speed up the data entry. But in the end, you export your terms you have in your listedness tabulations in your database, you upload them, create a data impact report, view the results, and update your auto-listedness as needed if there is any impact. Nowadays, MedDRA is quite stable, and usually there is not a big impact on that data, but it needs to be checked every now and then. And this is just how you do it. You actually go to the tool. I hope this works quick enough. Yes, it seems to go quite easy. So you log in. Here's the data impact report. You can manipulate kind of the versions you're comparing. So if your data is from a clinical trial, that may mean that's in a later version than just the recent up-versioning, and you can click for the secondary system organ class information, and you do a data impact report to upload whatever data you have. You then just actually upload your data. Your data has to be in a defined structure, but your table can have more than these columns. These 3 columns are the minimum, and they have to be the leftmost. You can have anything on the right side beyond that. So you just search for wherever your data is. I've done a demo MVAT for our auto-listedness. You open it, it recognizes the path. You just say next, and it validates the data. It will tell you errors. If somebody has misspelled things, it will recognize it. So if you don't have, if you have terms that are actually no MedDRA terms, or where you have mismatches between the code number and the term, it will tell you here. This has no errors, and the impact on about 10,000 terms, and it took just about shortly more than 10 seconds to do this, is minimal. And you can either open the changes here and have that, but you can actually export the whole thing to Excel and save to your computer systems, communicate on it. And that's it. That's the MVET. And you can do this with all your installed listings, not only for auto-listedness. So back to the presentation. So this is kind of in case this wouldn't have worked so good, and for the people who will look at the slides afterwards. So this is just the explanation with the red arrows how to work with the MVAT. And here is an example actually what happens when you get errors. And here is kind of the changes that you may see. So why do you have to do this? Even for auto-listedness, actually for auto-listedness, it's demotions that are critical. Just because, just an example here, if you have in your reference safety information, you have actually typed out local swelling, you have that in your listing, and this local swelling became an LLT in 20.1, and its PT became swelling. So if you have in your reference safety information local swelling, this will not cover all swellings. So you need to remove this term from your all.
Martin, we've lost your audio.
See if he comes back in a minute or so here, just to give him a chance to recover.
Let me send him a quick chat.
Yeah. So bear with us just a moment, folks, while we see if we can get Martin back online.
Can you hear me again?
Yes, yes, now we can.
Ah, good. So that's the internet. I hope you have got the comment on this slide mostly. So the top one is the critical thing where you really need to remove a term, the scenario, because when your reference safety information says local swelling and it's been demoted to LLT and replaced by the PT swelling, not all swellings will be covered by the term in the reference safety information of local swelling. A less critical point is the other way, is actually the bottom example where RESH generalized becomes demoted if you have RESH generalized within your reference safety information within your label. As more severe things usually cover less severe or slightly more or less specific things, the term generalized RESH will cover for the RESH usually, but that's your company decision. But this is just what you have to look out for as changes. Why do you need to check the supplemental terms, or what do you need to do for getting at the new terms to keep your medical concepts, your MedDRA groupings in line with what's available in MedDRA? Here's just an example. We have for one of our products, or any product which contains heparin, there may be the risk of heparin-induced thrombocytopenia. This is how it's defined. But actually, the algorithm behind what we have is a selection from the HLT thrombocytopenias and the HLT platelet analysis. We also double check via string search on LLT basis just for all heparin containing LLTs. And the inclusion criteria is actually a thrombocytopenia which is either specifically due to heparin as a causative agent or which does not specify a cause. So this is the background here, and this was actually done just some weeks ago for this MedDRA reversioning. This is how it looks. Actually, and you see the supplemental terms in, so here we looked into the thrombocytopenias and the green boxed are the new terms, and you need to decide on those. Again, on the other side, there's kind of the string search on heparin, and you see two are the same, but one you might have missed. But actually, this term has just a new allocation. It's not a new PT. It was already in the algorithm. So how do you go to this tool, and how can you see those? I hope this works as seamless as it went with the MVAT. So you do the same thing. You use your usual login. You have the web-based browser, and then you just go here and go for the supplemental English terms. And if you now just type in COVID, you see all, oh gosh, this has grown. The last time I've looked, it was only half of those terms. But yes, that's the current situation. That's why we're having a webinar. And they're all new, and they will become available with 23.1 in September, I think. So this is the structure, and you can have a look at those then. So, and whatever you do, you can use the full functionality of the MedDRA browser. So if you're looking for a new, a potentially new PT within an HLGT, you go here, open that HLGT as shown in the earlier slide. And that's the supplemental terms. So quite easy to look at. The version report, again, looks very similar to the data impact report. So it's actually more or less the same format, so that you don't need to think twice about what is meant. So they're all quite similar. You find the version report under the downloads within the release package. You find the supplemental changes also in a separate documentation here as well. But within your release package, there it is. And for something like an unknown risk of home-based self-administration, for example, that's an SMQ-based CMQ. So we had a company adaptation of an existing SMQ. And the question here is actually, is a certain error more likely to happen to a patient when he's doing it at home with their infusion? This was the example or the result of the example last time. So when it was in from 20 to 20, from 22.0 to 22.1, that was the changes. So these were the demoted edit terms, and you just decide on them what to do with these terms, and the ones with the green plus were added at that time, and the actually with a red cross was not added, but it's a demoted term, and it was demoted to a PT which was already on the list. So this demotion would have created a duplicate in the CMQ. So it was just removed. So that is what the tools can do for you and how to use them. Just to summarize, the MVET allows you to do a really quick analysis of any MedDRA-related impact on your data. As said, within clinical trials, when you have it in an older version, you can just analyze from 20.0 and have all the changes to 23 in one analysis. But usually you would do this half yearly for your database. The supplemental terms allow you an easy identification of new terms, and to use these tools actually does not really require high-tech environment or specific programming skills. You can do that with simply operating the tools as they are and export things to Excel and have further analysis in Excel, so fairly standard. So with that, the questions at the end of the webinar, I would hand over to Pat again.
Well, great. Thank you, Martin. I appreciate also you showing the supplemental view. I think it is a nice fit with what we're trying to be able to show people what's coming, and that general mechanism is helpful for people to know as well. So thank you very much for that, and a very interesting presentation. You might note, Martin, that there are a few questions that have been coming up during your presentation, so you might want to review them prior to the Q&A session. But now let me move to the Sno-Med CT/MedDRA mapping use case and our colleague Sheila Else from Bayer. So Sheila, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'll just also show my screen and then go into presentation modus. Okay. Okay, can everyone see and hear me?
Yes.
That's good.
That's great news. Yes, thank you very much for the introduction and for also inviting me to be here. I have to admit that I was looking forward to being in Amsterdam for a face-to-face meeting, but since this is not possible, I'm glad that I could also be here today to present this project of ours that we have at Bayer. So I've been at Bayer for 2.5 years. I'm in the Department of Regulatory Affairs in data management, where I'm mostly involved with master data management topics. And when I first started, I discovered semantics and ontologies and was very excited about this, and started looking into whether you can use things like ontologies as a tool in master data management. And from here I came to external standards and sharing our data. And of course, if we are able to share our data, we can eliminate a lot of things that each of many companies has to do separately on their own. But in doing this, then of course we found out about the necessity for different purposes and different standards, different needs for different terminologies, and then from there the need to map these. And so that is why I got very excited when I heard about the mappings already going on between MedDRA and Sno-Med, and asked my colleague at Bayer if we could please participate in the alpha testing. She of course told me about it, and that's how it came to be. So thank you very much. So I'm going to show you today the project that we have going on at Bayer in terms of these mappings. In terms of master data management, we're also always concerned with what we call things and whether we're talking about the same thing when we call them the same thing, or even if we have different terms, if they actually mean the same thing. And this, of course, isn't just a topic for us humans, it's a topic for our machines, and how to connect those data. Eliminate the data silos is a main topic in master data management, but it's becoming more and more a topic, I think, internationally across all functions, since we all are interested in using our data as an asset. And in terms of indications, this has become a great necessity. Indications is something that not all of us has been looking at as a separate asset, and so this is what we've started doing over the entire life cycle of both a product and an indication. These are our decision gates, as we call them at Bayer. We're looking at it from around what we call the confirmation concept, the concept confirmation. I've already forgotten my own abbreviations. They're not mine. Anyway, so from around the time we have to publish or communicate externally our indication or our intent of an indication is when we're starting to look at this. And so from the time we have to fill out a clinical trial application form and need for that an LLT from MedDRA, as well as a lay term translation, this is where we're looking at the indications, and until, of course, submissions, and then post-marketing, and in combination or in connection with the pharmacovigilance and safety reporting. And so this is our vision from the beginning, is to be able to use not only from left to right and from the beginning to the end, but in a circular way, the knowledge that we have in our data in every area, from every area. And so up on the upper right-hand corner, we have the modes of action and mechanisms and pathways from our development, from early development, where they use a combination of many different terminologies to search the literature. And this is where we also have come to discover the UMLS, the Unified Medical Language System, which we are using as the basis for the mappings. This is just an image I stole from the internet in terms of a thesaurus idea of being able to put in a text and as an output see whichever ones we might prefer seeing any user. If we only need MedDRA for the EMA or for pharmacovigilance, then we would only see the MedDRA, but we want to go up to 5 probably terminologies in our mappings, including the Sno-Med, MESH, Icd, and ATC codes. And so in terms, this is a lot of text, but in terms of our problem statement, we've determined that we both need our indications in internal documents and processes, but also externally. This includes the information exchange that we have on a regular basis, starting from these clinical trials with the health authorities. We have internal data, systems, and documents, and as I mentioned, over the entire life cycle of a product. We also have external data and documents, also in terms of using the real-world data for real-world evidence, but also in our health authority reporting. And as we all know, we have both a text and codes, but we also have indications as very long, detailed texts that somehow have to be reflected in the text and the codes of the indications. And so these are the standard vocabularies I mentioned that we're looking at, including. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we want to use external standards wherever possible, But of course, these different standards are fit for different purposes. And so we need to look at how we can make these globally compatible and in a standardized way. And so this is why we have identified the mapping between these vocabularies as a necessity in order to reach consistency in our documentation. And as we all know, and I'm sure this is, as Patrick mentioned, how complex these mappings are and how high the level of effort is for these mappings, it's very difficult because the hierarchy levels are different and the sizes of the terminologies as well as the different purposes of these mappings, and this is what causes the complexity. The one-to-one mapping is often not possible, and so we have to set rules for how we want to approach this. And we're looking at, in this sense, how to associate and link those terms with each other, and also define the characteristics and show how they relate to each other. I was once told that a vision or a mission should always be able to fit on a t-shirt. And I think if this is our mission or our goal, we would need an extra, extra large t-shirt and we would use the front and the back. But still, this is what we aim to do, is to harmonize our indication terms and codes in order to reach more efficient and comprehensive reporting, as well as a deeper and more consistent understanding of the diseases we're talking about. So this is a visualization of all the text you just heard. With our goal here in the middle, we have two worlds, our internal and our external, with many, many documents that are internal, but that also then need to be published externally, and many, many systems across the whole development of a product, which takes up to 10, 11, 12 years. And then the external world being the health authorities, the healthcare providers, as well as the HTA, the health technician assessment authorities, and then all the data registries that are there, the databases that are used for real world data research. We want to map those two worlds. We want to bridge those two worlds, I should say, with our mappings. And as the basis for all of this are the mappings between the reference vocabularies, mainly MedDRA and Sno-Med and MESH as the main three. The graphic on the right I stole from the EMA when they had a discussion with the HTA, the health technician authorities and the payers. But the arrows on the top I added because we want to be able to go in both directions. And so the use cases that we've submitted in a proposal for this idea of standardized mappings between these main vocabularies, we have submitted to ISO organization. That was also supposed to be a face-to-face meeting right now, basically this week or next week in Virginia, which is now split up into many different webinars. And this has been put on the agenda, is exactly this, standardization of mappings between these vocabularies. And these are the use cases that I'll be discussing there as well, is that we have different health authority reporting obligations. We want to support population and value-based indications from the health technology assessment perspective. This means including the ICD and the ATC codes. We want to standardize definitions of indications throughout the drug development. This means aligning not only, I should have added here clinical trials, but also the labeling perspective and then into the adverse event reporting. We want to also be able to define and describe our indications in recognizable terms based on identifiable patient populations. This is in terms of the real world evidence perspective. And under this, I also see the standardization of lay term translations, since I think this is an issue for all companies, as well as the health authorities. And so just a short summary on what we're doing in our project is that we're working on what I just mentioned, the ISO draft proposal, which will be taking place soon. Then we're working on a user interface of the mappings we've already produced in a sort of this vision of like a lingue type translation between all of our translations, but so far only in English. Not going into the area of the many different languages yet. We're also looking at developing an API, an application programming interface, as a back-end service for our systems, so that they would have, from the time point that we have an official MedDRA term with an LLT for a clinical study, that would be provided for the systems that need it through our vocabulary with the UMLS as a basis. The ULMLS preferred term, as well as the concept unique ID. This concept is so that also, if there's, for example, then a need for the same term that has been reported to the EMA in a MedDRA term, if we need that then in either MESH or Sno-Med for the FDA, then we would easily be able to link that via a concept unique ID from the UMLS. We've initiated an arm of this project for the standardization of lay term translations, in which we have to and will be aligning both the clinical and the labeling perspective. And for this, we're interviewing all the potential customers we see. And so what we've been working on is these mappings. This is what been our main focus, and providing these mappings. And again, like I said, this is why I was so excited to hear that MedDRA and Sno-Med have been working on this. I took the term heart attack as an example. We have for the FDA in either MESH or Sno-Med, the myocardial infarction, and then the parallel term in the EMA. In MedDRA for the EMA. And here you see in the center of all of this is the UMLS, where we would be able to, in a star form, map to the ones we might need in addition. Here I wanted to show just the difference in hierarchies of the different vocabularies, with the main three that I see as a basis in comparison. And again, this is the term heart attack taken as an example. And of course, we all know MedDRA in the terms of the hierarchy, from the broad to the specific of the system organ class down to the lowest level term. In Sno-Med, we have the one concept unique ID, or concept ID, and then many synonyms, and amongst those synonyms, the fully specified name, and then flags as to whether they're acceptable or preferred. And then in MESH, we have the even more granular down towards the specific. And so here in the middle, you see the myocardial infarction, which we would be looking to map. And so we see this UMLS at the center of these mappings. And so by having a concept unique ID, being able to make these indication data fair, and also by the assignment of this unique ID, making them more findable and then accessible for the whole company, at least for starts. And then from the ULMLS in the middle, to be able to go to the information provided by the other dictionaries. And this is in order to be able to use it in all these different areas, which I've already mentioned earlier. Yes. In terms of fair, I don't know how much I should go into that. Maybe we can address that in questions if anyone has any more questions about what exactly it means to make them findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. This is my last slide, and this shows the mappings as we see them in our repository, where we now have them, and we'll be working on visualizing them. This visualization is what I mean here by the right, where we say search and retrieve in a web interface or a user interface. And then above that is the provision of these mappings to our systems in an API type connection. In the middle, as you see, the mappings with the UMLS concept unique ID as the center, and then with our different categories, our different vocabularies. This vocabulary, lay terms, is one we'll be working on ourselves, but it's something I would love to see happening internationally in a standardized way and not by each company itself. And so what's meant here on the left is these different mappings, and here I would see curated mappings. I would want to see the official mappings between Sno-Med and MedDRA, the ones that are being tested right now in the alpha phase, because I think if they're being produced at this high standard and level, we would want to use those and not our own. And then in terms of other public mappings, there might be others in terms of Odyssey is one that comes to mind. As well as there's BioPortal. There are other mappings being done that would need to be looked at and then decided, should we use those, should we compare those, or should we just only use our own? Yeah, and then additional terms, I guess, would also be in terms of what we need to add from Bayer internally. We're also having discussions with some other pharmaceutical companies right now at the possibility of not only working together on this idea of standardizing these mappings at the ISO best practice level, but also in producing a list of highly curated indication terms, since it's possible that each company has a core that is the same in many other companies, and one could share those, and yeah, many companies could use those, and then only have the work of, let's say, 20% of adding their own internal terms that they see as necessary that wouldn't be included in this other 80% of the overlapping terms. But that's a future vision. It will be another T-shirt, another mission to be continued when we're done with this. So that's all I have, and questions will be welcome then when we're done.
Great. Well, thank you, Sheila. Much appreciate that. Let me just get my screen back up and going, and I can show the Q&A. I might mention just briefly, just relative to your presentation, and I saw some of the questions that were coming through, that we did look at other mappings when we were thinking about the Sno-Med and MedDRA mappings, but quite frankly, this is the first time that the two maintenance organizations have been involved directly in producing these mappings. So we found that other mappings, while they do exist, were probably not at the level at which we felt comfortable, and certainly not committed to the same level of maintenance that we're committed to as well. So I think that's what makes this Sno-Med MedDRA mapping a bit of a unique character, in that both organizations have seen poor mappings before and have had to try to resolve those sort of things. So we're motivated to maintain these mappings at a high quality. Before I kind of go into general Q&A sessions and maybe giving my colleagues a little bit of time to look at some of the questions that have come through, I'll try to address some of the ones that I've seen in general. There are a number that are related to this idea of an interim release, with these COVID-19 and related other terms are currently not going to be available until September. And if you think about the transition timeframe, it would not be until the first week in November before everyone transitions to that version. So that's a long time between now and then. So as I mentioned during my presentation, we are in some preliminary discussions with ICH to consider, is there something we can do between now and then? No guarantees about that, because this is a big, big shift. And we're talking about over 6,000 organizations around the world that are using MedDRA. We've worked hard to make sure everyone's using the same version. So the goal would be to make sure that if there is some different guidance, that we do it in conjunction with the industry and regulatory authorities, so reports don't get rejected and we don't cause confusion by trying to do something from a good perspective. So stay tuned on that particular point, and we'll be working with ICH to see if there's another option that we could consider. So a couple of questions related, since we're talking about mappings, to the potential of an ICD mapping. That is still one that we are looking at. We are at the early stages in discussions with WHO, but it is fully our intent to do something similar that we did with Sno-Med, where we would develop an initial mapping and then commit to maintaining that mapping in conjunction with WHO going forward. Again, I think that's an important part of it. It's one thing to build the mapping, it's another to maintain it. There was a specific question related to this Sno-Med mapping, and I thought it might be useful to talk a little bit about that. Was, essentially saying, well, what's the use cases for the mapping? From the Sno-Med to Metro perspective, it's allows the user to be able to access electronic health record data. So if someone is in a system that is using electronic health record and they discontinue a drug for whatever reason, that data can then be converted into a measure format and available to the regulatory authority or even the industry to be able to see that. In the reverse direction, if you're going from Metro to Sno-Med, this allows information to be able to be communicated to prescribers. So for instance, if you had a black box warning that was coming from a regulatory authority, you could be able to communicate that to the prescribers who are using potentially more of the electronic health record to understand a change relative to the warning for a particular product. So those are initial use cases that we've identified. There may be others as we go through, but those were the ones that we had in mind as we developed the mapping. So with that, Liz, if you have other questions that aren't covered by the ones that I addressed, I know Martin has some, and I think Sheila has some. So Liz, I'll ask you if you could select a few that we could respond to.
Okay, most of them do have to do with the COVID-19. I don't believe there's one question here. Could I have more clarification regarding using I think they mean SMQs in signal detection? Also, is there a structured source listing potential identified risks and missing information in RMPs?
I think this is for me, and I think he really means CMQ because it's
Thank you.
Custom company MedDRA query, actually the structured source listing, we have CMQs or SMQs, so something in place, an algorithm where we monitor all the risks in our risk management plans. So you have the risk management plan as the basis, and anything which is already in the risk management plan at CSL does have a defined algorithm, be it an SMQ or a company algorithm, that will have a specific look on it and highlight cases so that these cases are easily identified. Short notice, actually, within a week of them being processed, a specialized person will have had an additional look beyond the usual case processing from the risk management perspective on that case due to this CMQ being installed in our database. So this is potentially the answer. So the structured source is the risk management plan. And actually any other additional signal detection activity. So whenever there is the idea of a new risk on the horizon, they come to me and we do something, we create a respective algorithm, and during signal processing, this will then be identified as a new risk, or if refuted, and so forth. So the full signal detection, risk management processes are involved in this, and there's a structure via the respective guidances on it. We follow the best practice documents there, because there's a lot of details in there. Does that answer the question? Hopefully.
There was a follow-up to that. Not sure if you read it. Could I have more clarification regarding using CMQs in signal detection? Also, is there a structured source listing potential/identified risks and missing information in RMPs?
Yeah, and we do address also the missing information and all this via certain SMQs, CMQs, and monitor them. So the CMQ, SMQ thing is not necessarily, or especially the CMQ, something customized, is not addressing something completely new. That is done via PT and other signal detection methods, analysis, disproportional analysis, and all these things. But anything which is at least missing information, or which can be put into an algorithm, is actually installed on our database and documented accordingly.
Another question, follow-up clarification. Will data from some period of time be recoded to use the new, more specific term? And I presume she's talking about COVID-19 terms.
For CSL, we generally do not update historic data. So this is the one side. I do know that other companies with more resources on the IT issue do go through their old data and record them based on verbatim. CSL is not doing this. For COVID, we are definitely going to do it. We will recode. This is a special scenario. We have also our patients are potentially more threatened by COVID because they have immunodeficiency, they have transplant, they're cancer patients, and all these things, they receive a biologic. So we expect that we will need to analyze the data respectively specifically for COVID, and that's why we will most probably recode for the respective codes, as Pat has shown on the list, and we've seen on the demonstration of the new terms that will become available. But this is what we already prepare for now. The respective things have been the respective information have been given to our medical evaluators to case processing, so they're aware which terms to now pick, really, to then streamline the recoding in later this year in November.
This is a general question. I don't know who wants to take it. This person has a general sharing better practice question to the companies online. Are any of the companies looking into auto-coding or are already using an automation service or auto-coding tool, or looking into further auto-coding of AEs and MH in MedDRA? I'm thinking of a service, e.g. like the one UMC has developed called CODA, K-O-D-A. I would very much like to hear if you have any suggestions or experiences.
I suspect there are obviously many tools that people have been using for auto encoding. I think maybe what he's talking about is more as a service rather than an embedded product. So I think that one would be a difficult one to handle with the over 300 people that we have on board right now. So
I just can say, yes, we are looking at it in CSL. We have a proof of concept project, but this is something I can't provide details on.
Maybe there's a question for Sheila. I think I've seen a couple in there. There's one, coding indication with MedDRA is accepted in FDA or not? Slide 6 from Sheila. Can you please explain this in details?
Oh, yeah, okay. So I had to look at my slide 6. Yes, I've written that the FDA indications are coded in mesh or Sno-Med mapped to mesh. I'm not aware of what happens if one sends them the MedDRA term. I don't have direct experience with this. I have the documentation where I was told by our clinical trial transparency department that for the FDA, it needs to either be in Sno-Med or mesh. So I can't give any more detail than that, unfortunately. It's possible that the FDA is able to themselves translate if a LLT is sent in, that they're able to translate that. I'm not sure.
I know at one point they had an internal project to kind of index those indications to MedDRA because obviously their adverse event data is in MedDRA, and they were having difficulty connecting that to the label. So I suspect they do have a mechanism, but I can't speak for them.
Yeah, exactly. I was told that they had a project that was going on and it had been going on for quite a while, and that they did have something and they were thinking of offering that, but charging for the usage of it. This is the last I heard, but I haven't heard anything newer than that.
Another question to you, Sheila. There's is UMLS could map different indications with different MedDRA version into one unique CUI code?
That's interesting. I don't know about the versioning. I think that the UMLS is updated twice a year, and that coincides with the updates of MedDRA and Sno-Med, as well as the other dictionaries that are included in the UMLS. I'm not sure how they approach the versioning. That's a very good question that I'll look into.
Okay, thanks.
There's one general question which Pat has answered. I don't know that the whole group was able to see the answer. Trying to find the downloads page on the MedDRA website, and I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, Pat.
Sure. I can address it. So I think that maybe during the course of my presentation, they were looking to find a downloads page. So the upper right-hand corner, it's a little bit subtle, and it says download, and but it's in the upper right-hand corner of the homepage on the MedDRA.org site. So you should be able to access what you need to there. And there was another related question that was talking about, hey, I want, maybe it's the same one. I want to be able to see the supplemental terms that maybe this came during the course of Martin's discussion, because that's where we post them. But I really encourage, if you want to take a look at the terms, as particularly the COVID terms, in particular, if you're focusing on that, as we're adding them, probably the easiest way is just to log into the web-based browser, put it in supplemental view, and then you can see the new terms as Martin demonstrated, with a little green dashed box around them, so you know exactly what are the new terms. You can see what their placement will be, their full hierarchy. So it's I think a bit of an easier way than to access the supplemental terms from the website.
Here's a general question. This question is not really connected with the presentation, but may be quite important. What is the best practice to analyze MedDRA terms? For example, investigator during the trial reports one event which is MI due to stent thrombosis. We can cover this event using two MedDRA terms. For example, 1, PT vascular stent thrombosis, and 2, PT myocardial infarction. How to cover a problem where number of terms, in this example 2 terms, is greater than the number of reported events. 1. Should we separately analyze MedDRA terms and events reported by sites, or assign just one term to one event in various reports? Should we ask investigator to report 2 events, 1, stent thrombosis, and 2, MI, instead of 1, MI due to stent thrombosis in cases like this?
So either maybe Martin or Sheila, or I think Judy's online as well. You have an option, Judy, as our Chief Medical Officer, if you want to address that question.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I'd be happy to address that. Generally, the points to consider guidance is that you code all relevant information using as many events as possible. I do recognize, particularly in clinical trials, that due to the case report form design or database design, you may not have the ability to split a single report of MI due to stent thrombosis into 2 separate lines. There may be overrides that you can do with creating a duplicate line and coding both elements separately, myocardial infarction in one line, stent thrombosis in another line. But generally, you should use as many terms as possible to capture the reported information rather than leaving information out. But I recognize there are particular data constraints in clinical trial systems. Perhaps somebody like Martin could elaborate further on that.
Yes, I can. It's an old dilemma. The clinical trials databases and the documentation rules to have just one code for one reported term. Well, certainly a solution is to make the investigators split it. This is the preferred way at CSL usually, so that we don't get into that dilemma to have to split. And another thing is then if you have to stick with one term for it for technical reasons, you need to decide what is the most important, what is actually the diagnosis. That's my advice for this dilemma. And a very important thing is train your investigators to avoid it in the first place, to really train them to provide you with a diagnosis only in clinical trials, and to report 2 adverse events as 2 adverse events. And a little MedDRA training wouldn't be bad for investigators as well. Just the basics, things like that they have to provide, things that do not need to be split.
This is a general question. Studies running in the US which are considered for FDA admission, should they have been coded in Sno-Med instead of MedDRA, or is this then fixed by the mapping?
Yeah, I think this relates to the question earlier with what the FDA actually does with them. I think that, yeah, I think that they must have their own mechanisms of how they map them. And from my side, I only have what the documentation I was given, where it was said that the FDA would like it in either Sno-Med or Mesh. So I'm not sure what they do with it. I've been trying to find that out since I started this project.
I think that they're not talking about obviously the entirety of the data. I think it's specific to the indication field. And
yeah, exactly.
saying there's a bit of ambiguity about what's happening with that. We could try to resolve, but you know, like with Sheila, we've been trying to work on that for a bit, and I think it's a bit of a murky answer right now.
Yeah.
This also has to do with MedDRA and Sno-Med. I'm not sure if it was taken care of. Regarding the approach for mapping terms for MedDRA Sno-Med, it was mentioned that high-frequency terms as determined by the EMA would be prioritized. Could you give an idea of what type of coverage to expect from this effort?
Yeah, certainly I can talk about that. What I assume by coverage, they talked about the number of terms. So we started with roughly, say, 6,300 terms from the MedDRA side, and looked to map those from MedDRA to Sno-Med, and then to map from Sno-Med to MedDRA. So it's, as we're not always going to find exactly the same thing on both sides. You know, Sheila talked about the complexity of the differences of the terminologies and the rules associated with the terminology. So it's maybe not as straightforward as you might think. But the idea we started with that set. We thought that would be the greatest value from. So if you're interested, you might take a look to see what's in the alpha test set, which makes it clear about how the terms were mapped and the volume of them. There's a related concept, I think, or question just below that says UMLS has existing Sno-Med MedDRA mapping. Describe how the new mapping effort has extended this mapping. So, as I mentioned, we chose a different route rather than build on an existing one. This was all done with individuals, and Martin was one of those that individually mapped, and there were multiple people looking to map independently of each other. Then we checked in between them with some sort of a consensus to make sure we got a correct mapping, and then it was subsequently reviewed by both the MSSO and Sno-Med International. So I suspect there was more effort that we put into this initial mapping set than what was done with the UMLS mapping, but I know less about that one. When we looked, and this is maybe a little while ago, into UMLS mapping, it was not the level I think that we wanted to provide to users. I think we have actually just gone over our time a bit. Liz, unless you think there are any burning questions, we could wrap it up here, but let me ask that to you first.
I'm trying to go through them quickly, and I don't see anything that jumps out at me.
Okay. As I mentioned, we may not be able, as we have not been able to address all the questions. There are some that we may be able to address offline. But I'd like to thank both Martin and Sheila for their participation, as well as the over 300 people that participated in this webinar. So thank you very much, and please stay safe, and hopefully we'll be able to see you face-to-face soon enough. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.